Shalom, welcome to Awakening, TORAH Mussar Mindfulness, our weekly public offering from the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar Mindfulness. I am Rabbi Chasya Uriel Steinbauer, the founder and director of the Institute for Holiness, Hamachon LeKedusha. Delighted to have you here. It is Motzei Shabbat, after Shabbat here in Israel on Saturday, March 16th, 2024. And it's about 10:40 at night here on the 6th of the Hebrew month of Adar Bet, the second month of Adar, in the Hebrew year Tafshin Pei Daled 5784. Losing my mind tonight. So it has been well over a week since I met with you and recorded. So thank you for joining this live streaming session. If you're joining us live, or if you're watching or listening later on a podcast, we're delighted to have you. We are going to be covering TISSA, which is actually 2 parshiot ago now. This took place on March 2nd. The Hebrew date was Kaf Bet of Adar Aleph of Tafshin Pei Daled, 5784. So we're going to catch up. We're going to do TISSA today together, and then we'll jump in soon this week to Vayakhel. And then finally, we'll come to Pekudei, probably Motzei Shabbat. Doing our best to stay on top of things. As you know, things are difficult here in Israel. So I'm just delighted to be here with you to learn Torah together from the lenses of Mussar in the Jewish tradition and mindfulness in the Dharma of Theravada Buddhism. So let's jump in as we usually do. We cover our kavanot, our intentions for today's session, so that we get the most out of the session together. And hopefully we'll merit fulfilling these kavanot. The kavanot are the same, the intentions are the same every week, because we see this time together anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour of a threefold process, that we're doing this time together as an act of radical self-care. We're also doing this as an act to care for others and to strengthen our relationship with God. So we say this is something that we are doing to strengthen our own souls, to be of benefit to others in the future. We're also engaging in this learning and practice together to strengthen our relationship to others, so that we can be a better conduit of God's good to others when they need us. And as you know, there's so much need in the world right now. And finally, as I said, we're doing this to strengthen our relationship with the divine, really, so we can be that conduit to really bring God's good to others, make this world a better place one day at a time. Bezrat Hashem, God willing. So I stopped sharing screen for those of you watching by video or have vision. For those of you who are listening, we're back going to cover what is the summary of this Torah portion from the Hebrew Bible. And TISSA is Exodus. We're in the book of Exodus, Shemot, chapter 30, Pasuk 11, Yud Aleph, verse 11. And it goes to chapter 34, which would be Lamed Daled, and it goes to Pasuk 35. So just so you know where we are, I assume by now most of you who are interested in this have learned TISSA, but you can open up your Torah, your Hebrew Bible right now, and come to Exodus chapter 30, verse 11 through 34, 35. Okay, so let's look at our kavanot, not our kavanot, our summary for today's Torah portion, TISSA. So, as I had mentioned, there are going to be 4 parshiot, starting with Tetzaveh, which we did last week, TISSA, then Vayakhel, and Pekudei, that are going to be 4 parshiot that look at the building of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, which is essentially going to be the organizing principle for the community of our ancestors, of Bnei Israel, the children of Israel in the wilderness. So in this Torah portion, God tells Moshe to count, actually, the children of Israel, Bnei Israel, the Israelites, and all men above age 20 have to contribute a half shekel coin for the Mishkan. And the idea behind this is, at least most of our parshanim, most of our commentators over the past 2,000 years, really feel that this is an equalizing principle in the sense that everyone has contributed to the Mishkan, so everyone could feel this is my Mishkan. We share this. We all have contributed and bought into this, that it's not just for the elite or just for those who, during the Torah portion of Truma, who gave from their hearts anything to help build the Mishkan. This is this kind of overarching, almost in a sense, it's a chiyuv, it's an obligation, it's like tzedakah, required, obligatory giving. So this helps, I think, in a sense, buy ownership, right? In the sense of we all contribute, we all feel that part of it is ours. We create this as a community. So then God goes on to give instructions for more parts of the Mishkan, the kior, the basin for washing the Kohanim, which they have to do to become tahor, pure, while they do their service of their hands and feet. Also, we have the shemen ha-mishcha, which is this anointing oil that will go on to the priests, and also the katoret hasamim, the incense, what's going to hold the incense, essentially. So Bnei Israel, the children of Israel, this is the key part that's going to get to where we're going to focus on a bit. They worry, and they do more than worry. They worry when Moshe Rabbeinu, our prophet, our teacher, our leader, takes a long time to come down from Har Sinai. It's up there 40 days and 40 nights. The people have some internal reactivity that we might label as da'aga, worry. We will explore this. Why do we say this? Because there's immediately a reactivity behavior that demands of Aharon, Moshe's brother, he's the older brother, to make an Elohim. Okay, Elohim meaning God, idol, ruler, to lead them. Aharon, who is going to be the high priest, collects their jewelry and creates a golden egel. Okay. God immediately knows about this up in Har Sinai, and he wants to destroy Bnei Israel for this behavior. But Moshe pleads for their lives. Moshe hasn't seen the behavior yet. He's just heard about it from God on Har Sinai. Moshe comes down from Har Sinai carrying the luchot, these tablets that God's own etzba, God's own finger has engraved what we know to be the 10 utterances. In the West, it's known as the 10 Commandments. Moshe then sees, the first time, sees what's going on among the people down there and shatters the luchot, throws them down, destroys the egel, the golden calf. Much more ends up going on and happening in this parsha. You're welcome to read what happens, but for the point of the summary, God then tells Moshe to carve a new set of luchot. This time it's Moshe who's the one who carves it, to go back up to Har Sinai, and he's there for a second set of 40 days and 40 nights. And when Moshe comes down, his face is glowing, and then he teaches the Torah to Bnei Israel. Okay, so what's going on? What is it that, as you know, we've been following this year together, that this year is going to be dedicated to how we can really support ourselves and others in our communities in coping with, and for some people, healing and recovery from the genocide of October 7 in Israel, and the ongoing, obviously, kidnapping and captives and the war and then the ongoing terror attacks that continue with the missiles. It's just ongoing trauma. And so we dedicate this year to how we can learn from the Torah portion. What is it that we can use today to cope, right? What is it that the ancestors and God want us to be able to learn and pull out from the Torah? So may I be a vessel to bring something from it today that we can use, all right? So I want to go straight to the worry, the da'aga, that the people are experiencing. It seems to be some form of fear, anxiety, perhaps translated into a lack of trust. I'm not sure. None of us really know what's going on here in the sense did Moshe say to the people, I'll be up there exactly 40 days, and they were watching and counting? Or did he just say, I'll be up there, and when I come back down, I come back down? And it just became too long for the people. They couldn't bear it anymore. We don't know exactly, but we do know that the people became impatient. And as I said, we could talk about all sorts of internal states. There could have been doubt that was going on, that he was going to return at all. There's definitely, as I said, worry and fear and anxiety, a lack of bitachon, of trust in God, trust in Moshe. And we have to immediately think for our own practice, how do we behave when these states arise, right? When we go through the agaf, worry, when we go through pachad, fear, when we go through a state of anxiety, a lack of bitachon, a lack of trust, a lack of savlanut, which means a lack of bearing the burden of the situation, that all of a sudden we just can't handle, and we start to have internal reactivity. So think about us. Think about in your daily practice in your life, how do you begin to behave? Many of us, either in the past or in the present, act out on that reactivity. Instead of just practicing mindfulness and watching the states arise, and maybe even naming them, using all sorts of tools to say, oh, this is real fear here. This is real anxiety. This is real worry and a lack of trust and a lack of patience. I'm going to try to not react. I'm going to try to be aware of it and sit with it, right? Excuse me. What happens here with our ancestors is there's the impatience and whatever else is arising, the fear, translates into an immediate demand to Aharon, who will become the high priest. He is, in some ways, we could see Aharon as kind of like the stand-in for Moshe, like, in some of the systems, I think back to the United States, if the president is in a situation where he's not going to be available, then the vice president has to stand in the position as commander-in-chief and president until that situation changes. And so we have here Moshe Rabbeinu, who for some of the Israelites that came out of Egypt, were freed out of the institution of slavery, that he is almost like a god. He's definitely the go-between, right? He's definitely who they address in order to be in relationship with God. So much so that when they were at Har Sinai and God was actually trying to be interacting with them one-on-one, face-to-face, as a group, as a collective, they said, too much, you, Moshe, go and interact, and we will listen to you and learn from you, right? We will do and we will listen. So Moshe is absent from leadership. So Aharon, in some ways, is maybe he doesn't assume that position, but we in Mussar, in this practice of Mussar mindfulness, would definitely see that for balance anava, balance humility to happen, he has to understand the position that he's in and how he'll be treated and seen. And I think the whole enterprise kind of shocks him. He doesn't take up the perhaps balanced humility it's up for discussion, really. It's not where I'm going to spend most of my my time with you, but he immediately moves into responding, if not reacting. So the people come with their reactivity. They say to him, make us, and they're, how are they described? They're described that the Yikahel al, it's like the way that our ancestors understand it, and particularly scholars who look at this language, they see it's like a menacing gathering against him. So this is why I asked you to think for a minute, how do you behave when you're in these states? Do you come to people with calmness, with gentleness, with kindness? Or have you come with kind of a menacing gathering against, especially when it's a group, a collective, right? So this is what happens. They come and they demand that he immediately produce this Elohim, this God, this idol. I call it a Moshe replacement, right? Not sure they're really looking for a God here as much as they're looking for their leader, the person who has been leading this whole enterprise. So they ask Aharon to go ahead and do this. They ask him to make. We're going to pay attention to these verbs. He collects the jewelry. So he involves the kahal. It's almost like the building of the Mishkan. Come with your own heart, this nividut lev, this giving of the heart, this generosity. He collects the jewelry in order to create collective responsibility. If you're going to demand that I'm going to make this and you're going to come as a menacing gathering, then this is what's going to happen. I'm not going to make this on my own from whatever, maybe from even the material that was supposed to be given for building the Mishkan, the tabernacle. He collects their jewelry, right? And sometimes some of the rabbis see all his tactics as even delays, that he knew exactly what he was doing. There was a mindfulness behind it. There was a tearing, because he was so hopeful that Moshe Rabbeinu would show up, would return. So he collects the jewelry and then he creates the ego. So three verbs here: a sense of making, a collecting, and a creating. Okay. So basically, as I said in the summary, God wants to destroy all of Bnei Israel, and Moshe pleads for their lives. Something really, really important happens here. I want to say two things. For the first time, Bnei Israel, probably helping Aharon. We don't know if it's only Aharon who is making the egel. They're definitely participating by giving their jewelry, but I don't know if they're involved with their own hands, but they're definitely involved in their demands and their planning and their giving to produce it. And this is really, they made, and what they make is what they worship. And it's the first time that they're really making something with their own hands, their own giving, and it's completed. It's completed in one day, as far as we know. It's not like the Mishkan that's going to take a while, and it's so involved, and it's going to require expertise of people given, I want to call it God power, but basically given knowledge from God, Betzal El and Oholi Av, this way of being able to create and make everything for the Mishkan. This is the people. They make things with their own hands. They feel alienated from Moshe, that he hasn't returned. They feel alienated from God because from the time they have left Egypt, they really haven't made things with their own hands. They haven't really done things, right? The last time they really were demanded to do things and really produce with their own minds, hearts, and hands is when they were demanded to take the lamb in Egypt and slaughter it and put the blood on their doorposts, to eat the sacrificial lamb, to not eat chametz, to make sure to eat the matzah, to participate in this ritual. So you have to realize that there's something very powerful here. But what happens sometimes when any of us begin to make things, we sometimes can give it too much identity and power and mistake it for a Moshe replacement or a God replacement, instead of pausing and practicing humility, that kind of just realizing what's going on here. So you could notice that the people really wanted to create to do, right? And in some sense, God was not aware of this, or wasn't allowing, or this wasn't just happening in their midbar experience in the wilderness. So you even see this, right? Because Moshe was doing too much, right? He was God and Moshe were just doing too much on their own. It even took his father-in-law Yitro to come and say, "Ooh, you're doing too much in the judicial system. You need to create other judges that can handle 10,000, 1,000, 100, and so forth." Really involving the people more, right? And they're doing and participating. So what else do I want to say about this before I move into what happens with there's so much reactivity, right, going on here that I want to make sure I touch on each thing. So I'm going to go into addressing now God's anger, which comes across as rage, which comes across as wrath. And most people, when they read this, at least students of mine for the past over 20 years, reflect that they feel that God has gone into kind of a rageaholic act, that there's a lack of anger management. And I want us to dig deeper. I can see that. I can definitely see a pashat, a plain reading of the text might lend oneself to that. But it's so important for us to dig a little deeper. So let's go back to when Moshe first encounters God at the burning bush. And Moshe tries to argue his way out of responsibility, out of taking on the burden of helping free his people from the institution of slavery in Egypt. And he goes through like 4 different arguments, right? I can't do it, pick somebody else. Finally, I can't speak well. This goes on, right? So much so that when he finally does get to his most desperate push, that I can't do this, they won't listen to me. I have a heavy lips, heavy tongue. I can't be the one to speak this. God doesn't even address that anymore. There's no response for what actually Moshe communicated. Instead, God immediately goes to the solution, right? Says, "Oh, Aharon, your brother is coming. He will be your mouth. He will speak," right? So in that behavior and then that interaction, I feel like God is slowly, like a good teacher, training and modeling how to communicate and what to pay attention to and what not to, and how to respond without reactivity. That's the first interaction. Then we go back even further to Hashem, God's interaction with Avraham and even other people. When God tells all the stories, when there's wrath and rage, God says we must come down. I'm going to come down and check out the situation, right? God just doesn't like stay high away on some throne, doesn't witness what's going on and then just destroys, right? There's a coming down, there's a witnessing. So when, for instance, Sodom and Gomorrah happened back in Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, and God comes down to check out with the angels what's going on here. Are the cries really as bad as I hear? And basically, through that practice and cultivation and training of modeling how to behave, to really go with one's eyes and witness and check it out, we could all use that right now during this war, which is essentially he encourages by showing up and sharing with Abraham that he's about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. He's opening the door for holy argument, holy engagement, holy machloket, right? This sense of you've come down to witness what's happening in Sodom and Gomorrah. You can't kill and take everyone. What if there are 50 righteous people among the town? What if there's 40? What if there's 30? What if there's 20? What if there's 10? If there are 10 righteous people, you can't kill everyone on account of them. So he's really training through practice and cultivation what he expects of Abraham and his descendants. Really training a people to witness, consider, argue for L'Shem Shamayim, for the sake of heaven. So what do we see happen here? God is full of rage, right? He comes down and he says to Moshe, "Ve'ata hanicha li, ve'yichar api bahem, va'achalem." So he says, now, allow me to be, let me be, right? And let my anger, right? Let me be with my anger in a sense. Let my anger, right, be ablaze, may blaze forth like this rage against them and eat them, destroy them. Okay, that's the language. This comes from Exodus chapter 32, verse 10, right? Think about that language. Let me be, that my anger may blaze forth against them, that I may destroy them. So when we first hear this and read this, we think, oh my gosh, God's going to destroy them. But what we pay closer attention to, especially when we read the commentators and what's going on here, everyone agrees there's something really interesting going on when God says, Ve'ata anichali. Now let me be. Let me be alone with this rage, right? Really what he's saying, now let me be with you in Holy Makloket. Let me be with you that you save me, that you argue, that you show me why I should not. And the reason why I don't think there's actually like a rageaholic about to go forth with wrath, right? That is unchecked, is when anyone's really in a rage and they've already moved to reactivity, there's no space between the match and the fuse in the midah of ka'as, of anger. Once you've crossed over, there's no space between the match and the fuse. You've already acted out. So for God, if God actually was already saying, acting out, I'm going to destroy these people, bam, it's done. But God doesn't do that. And God actually communicates to Moshe. The minute you are communicating with someone else, now let me be, you're really not there. There's a space between the match and the fuse. There's a mindfulness there. There's a witnessing. There's a curiosity of how Moshe is going to respond to this. And Moshe steps up to the plate. Also, we know from God's behavior throughout the Torah that God never just shoots forth wrath and blaze without going down and checking what's really going on. So this is where the real practice and cultivation happens. God tells Moshe what had happened. Let me just say a few more words about this. I'll bring you a source right here. So this comes from Midrash, Shemot Rabbah, chapter 42:9, where the rabbis, our sages, our ancestors, compare God to a king who is so angry with his son that he's about to become violent with him. They compare Moshe to the boy's instructor in this story, who's in the room next door. And when he hears the king cry out, "Let me be," right? He realizes that no one else is in the chamber besides the king and his son? And that is the king. No one else is there to whom the king might be talking to. Let me be. The construction with his emotional intelligence from his practice of Mussar mindfulness, he concludes that the king must be calling out so that he will go in and plead on the boy's behalf, that he will be someone that calms that flame, that will move it away, right? Create that space between the match and the fuse. So essentially also in Devarim Rabbah, chapter 3:15, God has previously set up a system to manage divine motions, telling Moshe, let not the two of us be angry, but when you see me pour hot water, you pour cold. And when you see me pour cold water, you pour hot. There's something really beautiful in this because you can witness in the pausing. You can witness in the language being used, right? Let me be is a cry out of, don't you dare let me be. I've trained you through your ancestors with Avraham on forward. Let's see what you're going to do. Step up to the plate, Moshe. Have you really betrothed this people? Are they really your own? And then something magical happens, right? God doesn't go down. He tells Moshe what had happened. Moshe goes down as the witness. This is huge. This is huge, right? We know all along that wrath is never going to happen against Bnei Israel because God doesn't go on down to be the witness. God is starting to hand over personal and collective responsibility to the people and their behavior, to Moshe and his behavior, and to the people. Otherwise, God would have went down and checked out what was happening with that egel and then blaze forth, just like to Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Doesn't happen. So what we see is that God is really teaching Moshe, right, to go down to be this witness. There really is a cultivation of what we call God, even in the 13 midot, is slow to anger. It may not seem and feel like being slow to anger, but there is such a slowness to anger here because there's a pause, there's communication, there's a saying, engage me, and the let me be. There is really a practice and cultivation of leadership so that almost is like a nisayon for Moshe to go in practice, to be a witness, to see what is going to be the appropriate response, right? What should be the appropriate response to coming down and witnessing the golden calf? I'm not here to judge, but I'm here to witness what is actually going on here. What we witness is Moshe turns into a doer, right? He is also someone that is going to be enabled and given authority to recognize the people fully and who they are. The fact that he's even engaged later on to be the one who will create the second set of the luchot is really involving more and more independence and leadership. I think the only thing that we're left with before we analyze Moshe going down and witnessing what happened, and then is it a response? Is it reactivity? We have to question, did he take it too far? You know, we always question, what was Moshe's sin in the desert? Was it getting angry? Was it hitting the rock? Was it attributing to Aharon and him that they gave water to the people? You know, some people feel that there was something too much in how he reacted to the golden calf and how he organized the Leviim, the Levites, to kill 3,000 of their own people. So I'll leave that. But you have to notice that before Moshe goes down, he argues on behalf of these people. And it's an act of love as a verb. When you love someone, you argue on their behalf, you remind the other people of their commitment to them. So he tells God, you have this commitment to the ancestors, to Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, to Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah. You have this commitment that this is going to be for Am Yisrael, the people. And this act of love, right? He really moves from more than just an intercessor, right? To a leader, a doer, a maker. There are like 10 verbs that are used. If you go to chapter 32, verses 19 and 20, just going to pull out my let's see here. Okay, look what he does. This is the witnessing that's going to go on here. This is really, really intense. Okay, the people did, right? The people did, they demanded, they made. I told you about the 3 verbs, and watch what happens here. So Moshe came near the camp. He saw the calf and the dancing, the golden calf and the dancing around it. He became enraged. He hurled the tablets from his hands, shattered them at the floor. He took the calf that they had made. It says that they had made. Look at this verb here. Okay, remember when I said, is it really Aharon by himself, or is it also the people? So now we know. It says right here, right? If you look at verse 20, Vayikach et ha'egel asher asu, that they had made. Okay, so he took the calf that they had made and he burned it. He grounded it into powder. He strewed it upon the water, and he made the Israelites drink it. Okay, so when someone is full of rage and anger, and it's just rage and anger without any space between the match and the fuse and mindfulness, there's usually just the violence and it's done. There's not 10 verbs of behavior that they move through. Okay, and then I love this. Talk about learning when to respond or not. Is it worthy of a response? He learned from God very much, especially from that interaction at the burning bush. So when he says to his brother Aharon, what did this people do to you that you brought such great sin upon them, right? He's like, this is crazy. I leave you and this is what happens. It's unbelievable. And what is his response? He says, that out came this calf, right? Out came this calf. I told them to bring me this gold, right? Take it off. They gave it to me. I hurled it into the fire, and out came this calf as though it was fabricated itself. Total lack of personal responsibility. You have to remember, God is trying to train them, help them cultivate personal responsibility and collective responsibility. Moshe doesn't even respond. Just like God didn't respond to Moshe when he said, I have heavy lips, a heavy tongue. I am not the person to do this. They won't believe me. Low self-esteem, low self-esteem, low self-esteem. He just says, Aharon is here. The solution is here until you cultivate balanced anava, balanced humility. Moshe doesn't even respond, right? He basically ignores Aharon's excuse as if it's either unworthy of consideration. He even states clearly later on in Deuteronomy chapter 9, 12 through 22, that the Lord was angry enough with Aharon to have destroyed him. It was only by Moshe's intercession that he was saved, only by Moshe's leadership, only by Moshe's love, right? To love means I'm gonna fight for you. I'm going to remember the purity of your soul. I'm going to remember you at your best, your higher self. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. This is phenomenal. This is where you learn how much Moshe Rabbeinu loves the people and puts his own fate with them. He essentially tells God, if you're done with this people, you're done with me. Take me now. Really beautiful, really profound. Okay, so the final thing I want to say, and this is very important, what we're going to move into our mindfulness meditation practice. A lot of anger here, right? So we have to be very careful and look at what is this anger? Is it being managed? Is it anger for instruction purposes? Is it anger for Leshem Shemaim, for the sake of heaven, for machloket, for arguing, to come to some greater love and commitment to one another? This is going to be very important to what we're going to touch on today. So let's look at what happened. God goes on to, through his ongoing discussion with Moshe, he basically says, I'll send an angel ahead of you. This is the consequence for their behavior, that I'm still going to be in relationship, but at a bit of a distance, that this is the consequence of the people's behavior. And even their final punishment the consequence will be delayed. Okay. Even though Moshe took a lot of matters into his own hands. So there's a withdrawal of God. Okay. Part of God's presence withdrawals, and God even says why in the Torah. Okay, so if you go to chapter 33, verse 3, God says, I will not go myself, right? I will instead put an angel before you. I will not go myself, but why? Why will I not go myself? Lest I destroy you. So there's either in ongoing anger and rage, or there's an ongoing sadness and pain that can lead to anger and rage. There's been a shift, there's been a change in the very fabric and foundation of the relationship between God and the children of Israel through this sin of the golden calf. There's I don't 100% trust you anymore. And I don't trust, who knows, there might be some sense of, I'm not sure if I can trust my own behavior around you because of the anger. Who knows? But God's withdrawal of God's presence is actually a merciful preventative measure. It's like saying, I'm going to withdraw because if I don't withdraw, I might hurt you. Okay? That intention is to avert destructive consequences for their behavior or future ones of their behavior, but such as that happened with the golden calf. That's the intention of God. That is in the intention to avert what would inevitably be very destructive consequences for a potential, another episode like a golden calf, almost as if we could count on it, because there's been a breach in the relationship. And plus, we're human. We sin. We're probably going to mess up the relationship again. So it's almost as God is saying, I need to withdraw some because otherwise I'm going to hurt you. And I don't want to hurt you. So I'm going to withdraw. That's the intention. That's the kavanah. But we always talk about in our practice, particularly in our anti-racism work and anti-classism, anti-sexism, you name the ism, there's intention and then there's impact. So God's intention is to make sure to avert harm and suffering that God could cause to the people. The impact to the people and to even Moshe is detrimental to the relationship. It's almost like there's been a breach, and we'll continue to have some form of reconciliation and get along and move through this Bamidbar, through this wilderness, this desert, as some people translate it. But it's never going to be the same. Some of the rabbis compare it to, an unfaithful spouse. If the spouse, God forbid, cheats with somebody else, but they decide to commit to therapy together, they decide to commit to continuing the marriage, but there's still been a breach. There's still something there. There's still going to be a bit of a withdrawal as a protective measure, right? So this is done out of compassion and great responsibility, but we also know the impact. Now let's look at this. Moshe withdrew from the people physically to go up to the mountain. The intention was to serve, was to go up and serve God and come down and serve the people, get the Torah. What is the impact? What is the impact? It just tested too much, right? It tested the trust of the people and their patience and their skills and ability too much. It hurt the fabric and the foundation of the relationship. Then Israel, the children of Israel, right? What happens? They withdrew. In their fear and anxiety and lack of trust and their impatience, they withdrew from their higher selves. They withdrew from Moshe. They withdrew from God, right? The intention was to practice self-care and maybe some collective care, dealing with that anxiety. Let's produce an ego. Let's produce something with our own hands with this anxiety. Thinking it was the intention was good. It was for a purpose. It was that we needed a replacement for Moshe. We're using Aharon. The impact is that detrimental, just ruined their own internal relationship with the self, with Moshe, with God. There ends up being even more violence with him making the people drink and then telling the Leviim, the Levites, to kill 3,000 of their own people because they weren't with God. They had chosen the Egel. It goes on and on. And then God withdraws from the people. So let's look at what's going on since October 7th to move into our shared meditation together. What does God want us to learn and our ancestors from what can happen with our rage and anger, even if we feel it's justified and self-righteous or righteous? Anger, even when it may be just a state that will pass, often it has the impact of really harming the relationships. So what I'm witnessing, and I'm sure you are too, is that we're starting to have a real, I don't want to call it a rift, but I'm starting to witness some of our own Jews, some in Israel, but mostly in the diaspora, mostly in the United States, maybe some in Canada, elsewhere, but mostly I'm hearing these voices out of the States, which is these are loving, caring, compassionate people who are involved in human rights work. They have real compassion and concern for the people in Gaza and Gaza. Some also a concern, I would say maybe even the majority, a concern also for their brethren in Israel. And there's a real pain of witnessing what they see as harm and suffering to the children and women and the population in Gaza. And for some of that population, it's turning to internal rage and anger from a sense, and probably from real sense of hopelessness, also powerlessness, a real powerlessness, because here they are thousands of miles away. They can't impact decisions and policies of Israel and the Israeli army. They can't change things. Even if they're in Israel, they most likely couldn't do such a thing. But there's this real deep frustration. But it stems from a feeling of powerlessness, which is a little bit like what's going on with Bnei Israel. When Moshe goes up to the mountain and doesn't return, there's intense anxiety, worry, a lack of trust, you name it, right? And so in some sense, it's a feeling of powerlessness. Where did our leader go? What are we going to do? That's real intense powerlessness. And when people feel that, there's often intense reactivity that can even be acted out. So we sense and feel sometimes that acting out is beginning to happen. Some people are managing as best they can and will share it verbally. I'm so angry and frustrated. They just want to be heard. They need to be heard. But others, of course, are acting out, hurting their own people, maybe even hurting themselves and how they're seeing themselves. They're not acting out from their higher self. And so I'm getting to notice this anger, right? Bubbling, this lack of, this powerlessness that's coming out in rage and wrath, that when it can't be practiced around with deep self-compassion and communal compassion, it's going to start having destructive elements, both for the person inside experiencing this, dealing with this, and communally, like how we're going to talk and speak to one another, how we're going to potentially deal with this war and the aftermath. It's to the point where sometimes I can't even have conversations with some of my own people, let alone people who are not allies and outside. Like we have enemies. It's very clear. But when we start having people be so full of rage that they can't communicate in a civil discourse, l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, for having makloket, an argument that will lead to, God willing, a way for us to carry one another, to show that love that Moshe Rabbeinu showed, a deep, loyal commitment to one's to one's people, tribe, that I'm going to be there for you. I'm going to commit to you, even at your worst, even when you've created the golden calf. I'm going to come down and witness, right? There's so little true witnessing going on right now. One, because of the distance. So people abroad will rely on whatever news source that feeds what they already want to believe and hear. But that might not be the truth. And especially when we come to the numbers of deaths in Gaza, it has been verified by multiple organizations that no one can really rely on those. That's not to say there haven't been deaths. There have been many deaths. And it's awful and it's painful. And even to have discussion of like how many deaths is too many deaths, right? War is awful. We didn't want this war. It doesn't mean we're not responsible for the consequences that are going to happen, that will be with us, I'm guessing now, not only this generation, but for my children. It'll be the grandchildren, most likely, that will do any tikkun, any building of trust, for people to finally face with real clear seeing as the practice demands of us, and to be able to witness without reactivity or acting out with that reactivity. Wow, I feel really powerless because guess what? This war sucks. It sucks that excuse my language, but that there are captives now over 161 days, that so many people are being killed, including our soldiers, that none of us wanted to send over our sons and daughters. It's a sense of really seeing and not blaming, not attacking, so that we can actually sit and practice with self-compassion and compassion for the other. And so we're going to move into a practice of mindfulness meditation on self-compassion that I really encourage you to practice daily. There is no one solution to this, but all we can do is really take personal responsibility for what is arising in us. and making sure we do not act it out and cause more harm and suffering to others. It doesn't mean that we have to agree at all, but we can still speak to each other as created in the likeness and image of the divine, which we all are. So with that, I encourage you to move into your posture for our shared meditation today. So if you need to lie down, go ahead. Or for some of us, it's going to be just walking meditation of walking back and forth. Others, it's going to be a strong mountain pose, holding yourself. I'm going to be seated on the edge of my chair. You're also welcome to go to a zafu, a meditation cushion. And we're really going to settle. If you are seated like me, you're going to move into your seat bones, really feel the weight of an embodied experience that allows us to really be here, particularly if you're experiencing any trauma, is to look around the room before you close your eyes or lower your gaze, to know that you are safe and that you are here. And we'll begin with one deep inhalation and exhale, letting the hands settle where they feel comfortable, grounding the feet on the floor if you're seated in a chair. Inhalation and exhale. And one more deep inhalation, raising the shoulders up. And exhale, letting them fall and drop. Really beginning to settle and arrive, inviting yourself fully here. Head, heart, body, mind, soul. So this practice of mindfulness, it is one of accepting the painful without resistance, a real being with things as they are, which this is difficult enough for most beginners and most practitioners to just acknowledge how hard this is, right? Compassion, rachamim, wishes us who are experiencing this and anyone else who is experiencing pain or suffering to be free from the suffering and an active comfort and soothing. So there's a saying in the tradition, right, particularly in mindfulness and the Dharma, that when life is so hard, which it is right now, how can we be anything but kind? And I laugh at that because I realize how naive that is. Maybe that is the orientation of many people naturally, just to be kind when things are so hard. But what I'm witnessing from so many in our community across the world, from Jews in the diaspora to Jews in Israel, is that people are not being kind. And it is so hard. They're not being kind to themselves. They're not being kind to others. If anything, there's like taking out the wrath in order to feel better. But we all know that doesn't make anyone feel better. So we can sense amidst the difficulties and pains that this is inevitable. This is part of every human life. And what we're going to cultivate and practice in this life is an attitude, is a cultivation of kindness, of chesed, loving kindness and compassion, rachamim, because it is the intelligent, the appropriate, the wise response. So your instinct and your practice may be more so in offering compassion to others than it is to your own heart, mind, and body. And so much of recent studies in neuroscience has really recognized the need to develop and cultivate compassion for ourselves and self-compassion. It's really a need to recognize the particular ways in which we are harsh on ourselves. that we can make parts of ourselves into others, that we can blame, judge, and criticize. So cultivating the practice of compassion for ourselves is really integral to the practice of universal empathy and compassion. And in this guided meditation, we'll be developing this and exploring the ways of orienting our compassion internally. So there are three aspects of self-compassion that we rely on from the insights and teachings of Dr. Kristen Neff and Dr. Chris Germer. The first is the recognition and acknowledgement of the suffering that we're experiencing right now. So go ahead and just do that. Recognize and acknowledging that you are suffering. Now, suffering, dukkha, doesn't mean how it sounds in English. Often we think suffering means, I don't know, like a car accident, something so, or war, right? Or God forbid, other acts of violence. Suffering means that which is unwanted, right? Suffering is the unsatisfactoriness of life. Suffering is also pain, harm that we receive or cause from our reactivity. So really recognize that you might have something within you really right now with aversion, pushing away the powerlessness, the unwanted. I don't want this war. I don't want the consequences of being a Jew and having to live with the consequences of this war and all the anti-Semitism and how I am being hated. And so are my people, and so is the land, and so is our young sons and daughters who are serving. That brings up a lot in a lot of people. For some people, they will want to run away. They will want to disidentify, push it away. That's not me. I'm not a Jew. I'm not that kind of Jew. If you have that kind of voice in your side of yourself right now, you need to recognize and acknowledge it as a form of dukkha, of suffering, the fear, the powerlessness. And then we move into the second aspect of self-compassion, which is recognizing the universal nature of this suffering, that you are not alone. This is common humanity, first to just experience suffering, but even more so, your whole people are going through this in some form. The Gazans are going through this in some form. Allies and people who are supporting Israel are going through this in some form. Those supporting Palestine are going through this in some form. So contrary to how we often feel when we are suffering, we are not alone. Our suffering is actually something that unites us rather than divides us. And the third component of the cultivation of self-compassion is practicing the intention to meet that suffering with chesed, with loving kindness, with rachamim, with compassion. And as we settle into this meditation, this practice today, really settling into a posture that feels supportive, that feels comfortable, that feels grounding. Settling into a sense of the body sitting or standing or lying down or walking, feeling the sensitivity of this body, the way in which it is indeed impinged upon by life. settling into the sensitivity of this body. Feeling how the sensitivity can be supported by a sense of grounding, of really valuing the contact with that which is steadying, the anchors of the body that give support, that give a sense of okayness, the feet on the ground, the sit bones, the tall, erect spine, the dignity that you were created in the image and likeness of the divine, your head reaching up to the Shemaim, the heavens, connecting you between heaven and earth. Hands resting in the lap. So sometimes the most compassionate response to our suffering is simply to move between the hands resting in the lap and the simple movements of breathing, having your attention move from your hands, in breath, to your attention to your breath on the out breath, allowing these to be anchors, places you can return to, breathing in the hands, breathing out your breath and awareness of the breath. Places of steadying, places of resourcing, places of feeling the sensitivity of the body and heart, to feel the tenderness that is impinged upon by life, by this war, by the kidnappings, by the genocide of October 7th, by the trauma, by the ongoing anti-Semitism, by the fear and the powerlessness, by the lack of bitachon, the lack of trust in God. Touching that difficulty, seeing if it's possible to just allow and breathe with the pain in the heart, mind, and body. Checking in to see if your body and heart, mind feel relatively resourced, or if you're feeling that this is not manageable, if this is feeling overwhelming, to acknowledge it and name it. Acknowledging the suffering, asking yourself, what does this need right now? Encouraging you to rub your chest with your hands. Staying in contact with your anchors, your hands on your lap, your breath. Noticing how remembering the pain and suffering, how it affects your heart and your body. Noticing if there is contraction, tightening, a change in tone or texture of the body, a change in mood or the feel of the mind. Breathing in with this, asking if you can allow this. Gently placing the hand on your heart, belly, or some other part of the body that is in pain, or just to support an attitude of chesed, of kindness, and of tipul, of care. Can you experience the touch of your own hands as a touch of compassion? Recognizing the presence of suffering, whispering kindly to yourself, this is suffering. This is difficult. This hurts. You might even whisper to yourself, ouch, this sucks. Allowing ourselves to feel and breathe with this. Allowing this to be present. And if at any stage this feels too much, just feels overwhelming, you don't feel resourced, taking your attention to the places of support and anchoring, the feet, the sit bones, the hands, and the breathing, places of steadying in the midst of this difficulty. Imagine if Bnei Israel and their total reactivity of Moshe not coming down the mountain were able to practice this together, being with the suffering, recognizing, turning to Aharon instead of saying, make us an egel, sit with us, guide us in this Mussar mindfulness meditation, be with us in this suffering and this fear and this doubt that we are plagued by. Really bringing a care and kindness to suffering, to your suffering, to theirs. This is where they could have recognized that they were not alone in their suffering and reactivity. And this is what you can do right now. This is the invitation to recognize that other people, other Jews, our allies, our enemies are experiencing suffering in this moment. The stories are different. The sense and the flavor of the suffering is different, maybe similar. Just to acknowledge how suffering connects us. Even if at times we feel very alone in the midst of it. Other people are experiencing this. Suffering and vulnerability. Our teacher, Christina Feldman, defines dukkha, which is normally translated from the Sanskrit and Pali as suffering. She defines it as human vulnerability. That this vulnerability is something that unites us, that connects us. Remembering this can be a support in the face of our contracting, of our shutting down, of our turning our heart into Paros, the Pharaoh's heart. So bringing care and kindness to your suffering. Really embodying the intention now to relate to ourselves with love, with kindness, with compassion in the midst of this. Whispering to yourself, I care about my suffering in the midst of this. May I hold the suffering with compassion. May I hold the suffering with compassion. Breathing with that. Breathing in the suffering. Breathing out compassion. Sensing to the extent that feels possible the meeting of the suffering in this moment with an attitude of care, of tenderness, of compassion. Breathing in the suffering. Breathing out compassion. It is so important in this cultivation of self-compassion to keep sensing what resources us, to keep in touch with the sense of the grounding, our feet, our sit bones, our hands and our breaths, to know that we are breathing the same oxygen, that we are practicing together here right now, that we are united, taking refuge in this community and this practice together, taking refuge in God, the sense of uprightness, the sense that we are created in the image and likeness of the divine, the sense of nourishment of this practice of breathing. It may be, as you sit here right now, that this feels enough for right now. We will end this practice when I ring the bells of letting your hands return to your lap, coming back to a sense of grounding the body, maybe bringing to mind something that you're grateful for in this moment or at this time. Resourcing yourself in this way, even in the midst of this most difficult moment of our lives. We will sit in a minute of silence. If your eyes are closed, gently and slowly open them, letting the light slowly come in before you join us on the sacred Zoom screen, joining us in this session or live streaming on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Or maybe you're joining us through the blog at kehilatmussar.com or seeing us on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Or maybe you're just listening on podcasts and audio, really allowing yourself to slowly come out of this meditation, giving a great bow to the divine. Thank you, Hashem, for today, for this practice, uniting us, carrying us through this moment. Giving a bow to your VAD, your Sangha, to the Mussar mindfulness community of the Institute for Holiness, Kehilat Mussar Mindfulness. Giving a bow to our ancestors and to our teachers, for really being vessels, right? Bringing God's good to us to enable these teachings and practices to come down to support us. And thank you to you for your strength and courage for showing up to practice, really being with it together. I thank you for today. Please do join our email list, become a member of the Institute for Holiness, reach out to begin practicing and learning together, really strengthening each other. And thank you for today. Your donations are generously and gratefully accepted. Please do reach out to do so. You can find donation button on the website of kehilatmussar.com. Always welcome, sponsorships in honor or in memory of a beloved one who has passed. So thank you again for today. I look forward to connecting soon for the next Torah portion of Vayakhel, and by the end of the week, Pekudei. Before we enter the next book of the Torah, what comes after Shemot? Exodus? Anyone? Take a guess. We're moving into what's going to take place in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle, right? Beautiful, beautiful practice. One of the most difficult books for many people of the wonderful Torah of the Hebrew Bible. So joining us for Vayikra of Leviticus. So I will see you soon. You take care of yourself. Thank you.